The wind cut across the plains like a knife, carrying with it the bitter scent of dust and dry grass. In the heart of the old western frontier, a small, struggling ranch sat at the edge of a valley, surrounded by jagged hills and sparse pine trees. The earth was cracked, the soil tired from years of drought, yet the ranch still stood, stubbornly clinging to life. Tomas Ortega, a lean man in his early 40s, wiped sweat and dust from his brow as he mended the fence that bordered his meager plot of land. Life had not been kind to him. His family had long since passed, and he survived alone with the help of a few livestock and the occasional barter with neighbors. He was poor, but he had pride, and his small ranch represented everything he had left. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the western hills and painted the sky in shades of fire and gold, a thin, ragged figure appeared on the horizon. At first, Tomas thought it was a trick of the light, dust swirling in the wind, but as the figure drew closer, he saw it was a woman. Her dress was torn, her face streaked with dirt and tears, and she walked with a frail child clutching each hand. Tomas instinctively tightened his grip on the fence post and studied her. She was a widow, he could tell, and the desperation in her eyes cut deeper than any blade. "Please," she called out, her voice trembling with hunger and exhaustion. "Take my children. Feed them." "I cannot," her words faltered, tears streaming down her face. "I cannot feed them. I am done." Tomas' heart clenched. He had known hunger, he had known despair, but the sight of these small, innocent faces brought something to life inside him that he hadn't felt in years. He could not simply watch them starve. "Come inside," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "I'll take you too." The widow blinked, confusion mixing with hope. You will," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Tomas nodded, stepping aside to allow her and her children into his modest cabin. Inside, the space was cramped and sparsely furnished, a wooden table, a couple of chairs, and a stove that barely kept the cold at bay. Yet to the widow and her children, it was more than a home. It was sanctuary. He quickly set to work. He heated water over the stove and pulled out what little food he had stored, some dried meat, hard bread, and a few wild herbs he had gathered over the past week. The children, small and gaunt, sat on the floor, their eyes wide with hunger and disbelief. "This isn't much," Tomas said quietly, breaking the bread into pieces. "But it will keep you alive tonight." The widow knelt beside him, pressing her children close. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I was ready to lose them, to lose myself." Tomas shook his head. "No thanks needed. Just survive. That's all I ask." The night fell heavy over the ranch, the wind moaning through the broken fences and the sparse trees. Tomas and the widow sat together in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. He thought of the years he had spent alone, the long nights of worry about crops failing and animals dying. She thought of the despair that had brought her to his door, the nights she had cried silently while her children slept beside her, hungry and frightened. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, life began to take shape inside the tiny cabin. Tomas taught the widow how to tend to the garden, how to milk the goats, and how to preserve what little they had. The children, once frail and sullen, began to laugh again, chasing each other across the yard and playing with the animals. But life on the frontier was never easy. One morning, as Tomas was repairing a section of the fence, he heard the distant sound of hooves. A group of bandits, desperate and dangerous, were heading toward the ranch, drawn by the rumor of the widow seeking shelter with a man of the land. Tomas didn't panic. He had faced hardship before, and he had no intention of letting these strangers harm the family that had become his own. He armed himself with a rifle and prepared the cabin. The widow and the children were hidden in the small loft, while he positioned himself to defend the only door leading inside. The bandits arrived just as the sun began to rise, their shadows long and menacing. They demanded entry, their voices cruel and mocking. "Open up," one shouted. "We know there's food in there. We know she's with you." Tomas' response was steady and unwavering. "This is my home. You will not harm them. Leave now, and no one gets hurt. The leader of the bandits laughed, a cruel, high-pitched sound that echoed across the empty valley. You think a lone man can stop us? Step aside, old man. But Tomas did not step aside. He aimed carefully, every movement precise, every breath measured. The first bandit tried to force the door, and the shot rang out, a deafening crack that echoed through the hills. The man fell, clutching his shoulder, screaming. Chaos erupted. The other bandits hesitated, unsure, while Tomas took cover and fired with careful accuracy. The cabin became a fortress, and the wind carried the sound of desperate struggle across the plains. Eventually, the bandits realized they were outmatched. They fled into the hills, leaving behind their wounded companion and a trail of dust and panic. Tomas lowered his rifle, chest heaving. He wiped sweat and blood from his brow, knowing that survival was not about victory. It was about protecting those who could not protect themselves. The widow climbed down from the loft, her children clinging to her skirts. You saved us, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. I thought we had lost everything. Tomas smiled faintly, exhaustion and relief etched on his face. No. You still have life. You still have each other. That's what matters. As the days passed, the ranch slowly began to thrive again. The widow and her children learned to work the land, to raise the animals, and to survive the harsh frontier alongside Tomas. In time, the small cabin became a home full of laughter, hope, and the quiet pride of survival. And through it all, the widow never forgot the words he had spoken that first night, I'll take you too. They were simple words, but they carried the weight of courage, compassion, and the unyielding determination to protect the innocent. Tomas had given them more than shelter. He had given them a chance at life. And in the vast, unforgiving frontier, that chance was more precious than gold. The mountains whispered their quiet approval, the wind rustled through the sparse pines, and the small ranch stood as a testament to humanity's strength, that even in the face of despair, kindness and courage could bloom, unshakable and enduring. And in that rugged land, where survival often demanded cruelty, one man's simple act of bravery had saved a family from the brink, and in doing so, created a story that would be remembered for generations.